With Christmas fast approaching, we decided to get in early with a quick and easy sewing project. We're using a rather clever technique that involves placing a square of fabric on top of another piece of fabric to create a quilt block. So we thought, why not adapt this technique to make a placemat? So that's exactly what we'll be showing you in this tutorial. Now I'm going to start with two pieces of fabric, and these are going to make up the front of the placemat. Now the larger piece measures 19 inches by 13 inches and the smaller piece measures 13.5 inches by 7.5. And what we need to do is place the smaller piece in the center of the large piece, and we want to get this nicely centered. Now you can do this in two ways. You can fold each piece in half and then open it up and fold along the other side. You can just finger press the folds, or you can give them a press with an iron, which will create a nice crease. Now once you've done that, you can see how nicely you can line the two pieces up. Now the other way involves drawing lines, which is my preference, and normally I would use a friction pen to do this, but I try to avoid doing that on the front side of fabric, so I'm going to use a chalk marker here, and I'll put a link in the description field below to the one that we use. So once you've lined up the two pieces of fabric, just pin them together to hold them in place. This just stops them moving around while we go on to the next step. Now what we're going to do next is fold down both of the long sides of the placemat so that they line up along the inside piece of fabric. So you have a few options here. You can fold the fabric over and just feel for the fabric underneath to make sure you're not overlapping it, and then press. Or you can use a strip of cardstock which you place along the edge of the inner fabric and fold the longer piece over like so. Or you can use one of these clover heat press strips, which I'm going to use. I'll put a link to these in the description field below. They're brilliant. So once you've pressed the sides over, you need to sew along both edges with a 1/4 inch seam. And just before we continue, here's a quick word from our sponsor. And since we are making a Christmas project, I thought I'd show you what I'm thinking of making for the kids in the family this Christmas. Now I found this class on Craftsy for Christmas stockings, and coincidentally Craftsy just happened to be the sponsor of this video. Now for those that don't know, Craftsy is your online resource for all things creative, including quilting, sewing, cooking, knitting, crochet, and so much more. And since I'm focused on Christmas right now, I thought I'd take a look at some of their other classes, and I found these super cute cookies. Now I'm not sure that I'm that skilled yet, but I'm sure I will be by the end of the class. And another thing I want to try are the macarons, and they even have a class for that. So if you're interested in learning some new skills, then check out Craftsy. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click on the link in the video description will get a full year of premium membership to Craftsy for only $1.49. And now, back to our project. Now that they are sewn, we need to press these sides open, so I'm going to set the seam first and then open it up and press all the way along, and then I'll repeat that process with the other side. So at this point you can see that we have these two open sides and we need to close them up. So what I'm going to do is sew the side pieces in the same way that I sewed the long edge pieces. So I'll fold them over and then press each side and then sew along the edge with a 1/4 inch seam. And once that's done, we just need to press those strips open just as we did with the long edge pieces. Now we're ready to add our backing and our batting, which I have here, and these both measure 14 inches by 20 inches. And what I'm going to do is spray them with my 505 adhesive spray. This is purely optional, but I like using it as it helps to keep the layers together. So I just spray on each side and then smooth it all down, and I also like to give it a press at this point to remove any bubbles. I don't press down too hard with the iron though, as it can warp the batting. Next we need to place our placemat on top of the layers, and again I'm going to use some spray to hold it in place. Now we're ready to quilt this, and I'm going to keep it simple and just draw some lines along the centerpiece. At this point the center should measure 13 inches, so I'm just going to draw the lines at 1 inch marks all the way along. Now you may be wondering why I'm using a friction pen for this step when I already mentioned that I try to avoid using it on the front of fabrics. Well, first of all, the chalk marker doesn't show up as well on this fussy fabric, and secondly, I'm going to be stitching on top of those drawn lines, so it will hide the lines if they happen to show up again. So you can see how those lines look there, and you might also notice that I have also pinned around the edges. This just stops the fabric from drawing in too much when I start quilting. So at the machine I start in the middle and I begin with a small back stitch and then top stitch along the drawn line, and then when I get to the other end I finish with a back stitch. If your machine does a tie off, you can use that. And I'll repeat that with all of those lines drawn. So you can see that the lines are sewn and I have removed the pins, and now I'm ready to give this a trim, which is always the best part. So I'm going to line up my ruler along a seam line and trim back the side, and I'll do the same on the other side, and then I'll repeat the process with the long edges. Now we're ready for the binding, and for this placemat you're going to need 2 strips of fabric that measure 2 1/4 by the width of fabric, but I'm actually going to use up some scrap pieces I have on hand, and I'll just make a strip long enough to go around the centre piece plus about 10 inches. If you need to know how to add binding, then check out a tutorial on how to add binding to a placemat, and I'll put a link to that video in the description field below. Okay, so our Christmas placemat is complete, and just remember that you can use this pattern in any other non-Christmassy patterns, which is what I have here. So thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this tutorial, please like and subscribe to the channel, and you might want to check out this video next.